and I think Marcus wanted the two of us to do something together while we still could. So when he asked me to take a week off in the middle of July and come out to North Carolina to hike a loop in the Pisgah National Forest with him, I said yes. I didn't want to. I said yes anyway. Marcus is 4 years older than me. He's the kind of person who reads the gear reviews, who has the spreadsheet, who knows the difference between the water filters and has opinions about all of them. He'd done this loop before, years earlier, with a girlfriend who's now long gone from his life, and he talked about it like it was a place he needed to go back to. About 60 miles total. He figured 6 days if we took it easy, which we were going to, because of me. We'd start at a trailhead off the Blue Ridge Parkway, drop down into the drainages, follow a creek for a while, climb up to a ridgeline, and come back around. He had it all mapped. He had permits where we needed them. He'd planned the water sources and the campsites, and even where we'd hang the food at night. I flew into Asheville on the Saturday, and Marcus picked me up at the airport, and we spent that first night at his place, which is a little rental cabin he keeps about 40 minutes outside the city, up a gravel road surrounded by trees. He'd laid all the gear out on the floor of the living room in 2 piles, mine and his, and he walked me through every piece of it like a man unpacking for surgery. This is your sleeping bag. This is your pad. You blow it up like this. Don't overdo it or it's too firm. These are your socks. You'll wear 1 pair and keep 1 dry. The dry pair is sacred. You never hike in the dry pair. This is the water filter, and he held it up like it was made of gold. And I rolled my eyes at him and he said, "You'll thank me," and he was right. Except for what actually happened, which neither of us could have planned for. That evening, we drove into the little town near the trailhead and ate dinner at a diner and stopped at a gas station to top off and grab a few last things, and there was a Forest Service bulletin board outside the gas station with the usual stuff tacked to it. Bear warnings, a notice about a trail closure somewhere else in the district, and a couple of faded missing person flyers under the plastic. I didn't really look at them. I wish now that I had. One of them, I found out much later, was for the hunter. He'd been missing almost 2 years by then, and the flyer was sun-bleached almost white, just a ghost of a face and a phone number you could barely read. I walked right past it carrying a bag of beef jerky and a bottle of Gatorade, and I didn't give it a second of thought. Marcus says he doesn't remember the flyer at all, but it was there. It had been there the whole time, and he was bringing Boone. Boone is a shepherd mix, mostly black, with some brown on his legs and chest. Big through the shoulders, with 1 ear that stands up and 1 that flops. Marcus got him from a shelter about 5 years ago, and the 2 of them are inseparable in a way that I used to find a little much, honestly. The dog sleeps in his bed. The dog rides in the front seat. But Boone is also genuinely a good dog, calm, steady, not a barker. He'd done plenty of camping with Marcus, and he knew the drill. I remember thinking when Marcus loaded him into the truck at the trailhead that having the dog along would make the whole thing more relaxed. A dog like Boone, you don't worry. You just follow him. I want to be very clear about something before I go on, because it matters for everything that came after. Boone did not get spooked easily. In 5 years, I had seen that dog completely unbothered by thunderstorms, by fireworks, by other dogs twice his size, by a black bear that crossed a campground we were in one time and sent everyone else scrambling. Boone watched that bear walk by and then went back to chewing his stick. That's the kind of animal he is. So when I tell you what he did on the second day, I need you to understand that it was not normal. It was not a dog being a dog. In 5 years, I had never once seen him do it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We left the trailhead on a Sunday morning, the first Sunday after the 4th of July. It was already hot, even up at that elevation, the kind of southern summer heat that has weight to it, that sits on your chest. The air was thick and green-smelling and full of insect noise. Marcus had the bigger pack because he insisted, and I had a pack that was still heavier than anything I'd carried in years, and Boone trotted along between us off-leash with his tongue out, happy as anything. The first few miles were easy, mostly downhill, the trail wide and well used. We passed a couple of day hikers coming the other way, and Marcus said hello, and they said hello back, and everything was exactly as nice as I'd been promised it would be. A little before noon, we passed the last group of people we'd see for days. It was a family, a man and a woman and 2 teenagers, all of them in matching clean gear, day packing in from a different access point. The father stopped to chat with Marcus the way men do on trails, comparing notes. Where you headed? How far you going? And Marcus told him the loop, and the man whistled and said that's ambitious in this heat, and wished us luck. The mother made a fuss over Boone. The 2 teenagers stood off to the side looking at their phones, even out there, where I doubt there was any signal at all. I remember thinking how normal they were, how ordinary, and I remember that after they'd gone on past us, the trail felt suddenly empty in a way it hadn't a minute before. Like a door closing. We were the only people going our direction. From that point on, for the rest of the loop, the trail belonged to us, or so I thought. We dropped down into the first drainage by early afternoon and stopped to filter water at the creek. Marcus had this whole system, the dirty bag and the clean bag and the little hose, and he made a thing of teaching it to me even though I doubted I'd ever use it again. Boone waded into the creek up to his belly and drank and then flopped down in the shallows to cool off. And Marcus laughed at him, and I remember that moment really clearly because it was the last one that felt completely good. After that, there's a kind of shadow over everything when I look back, even though nothing had happened yet. We made camp that first night at a spot Marcus knew, a flat area maybe 100 feet off the trail near where 2 creeks came together. We got the tents up, we cooked dinner on his little stove, we hung the food bag from a branch the way you're supposed to, and we sat out until it got dark, talking about Dad and about nothing. Marcus told me a long story about the last time he'd done this loop, with the girlfriend, how it had rained for 3 days straight, and they'd fought the whole way, and broken up not long after, and how he'd always wanted to come back and do it right, do it with good weather, do it with someone he actually wanted to be around. He didn't say it sappy, he just said it. Boone lay against his leg the whole time. It was a good night. I slept hard. The second day is when it started. We broke camp in the morning and the trail started climbing, gently at first, and then more steeply, following the contour up out of the drainage toward a ridge. Marcus was in front, I was in the middle, and Boone, who normally ranged ahead and behind and all around us, sniffing everything, was sticking close. I noticed it but didn't think much of it. Maybe he was tired, maybe the climb. He kept pressing against the backs of my legs, which was annoying on a narrow trail, and a couple of times I almost tripped over him. Around midday, we came to a place where the trail crossed the head of a side drainage. I don't know the proper name for it. It was a kind of cut in the mountainside, a steep little valley running down and away to our right, full of thick bushes and dark even in the middle of the day because the canopy was so thick. The trail just clipped across the top of it on a narrow bench of dirt, maybe 40 feet of exposed crossing, and then continued up into the trees on the far side. Nothing about it looked dangerous. It was just shady and close and quiet. Boone stopped at the edge of it and would not go across. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just stopped, planted, with his head low and his ears back, staring down into the drainage. Marcus, who was already across, called him. Boone didn't move. Marcus called again, used the sharp voice he uses when he means it, and Boone looked at him and looked back down into the drainage and let out this low sound I had never heard him make. Not a growl exactly, more like a moan, a sound of pure distress. His whole body was shaking. His tail was tucked all the way under. Marcus came back across and crouched down and put his hands on him and tried to soothe him, and the dog leaned into him and kept making that sound and would not take his eyes off whatever was down there. I looked. Marcus looked. There was nothing. Just the trees and the dark and the shape of the ground falling away. No animal, no movement, no smell that I could pick up. But the dog was terrified of it. We stood there for probably 20 minutes trying to coax him across. Marcus tried treats. He tried carrying him, which is no small thing. Boone's a big dog, and Boone squirmed out of his arms and bolted back the way we'd come and stood on the trail behind us, looking at us, clearly wanting us to follow. That was the part that got under my skin a little, even then. He wasn't just scared of the crossing. He wanted us to leave. He wanted us to go back. I went and stood at the edge of the crossing myself, to to see what I could see, while Marcus dealt with the dog. I want to describe it properly, because I've thought about it so much since. The drainage fell away below the trail at a steep angle, maybe 30 or 40 degrees, choked solid with shrubs, the big old kind that grows in tangled tunnels you'd have to crawl through. The canopy above it was complete, so that even with the sun directly overhead, the bottom of the drainage was in a kind of permanent green twilight. You couldn't see more than 15 or 20 feet down into it, before it just became dark and tangled and impossible. There was a smell, now that I was paying attention, but it wasn't a dead smell. It was a closed-up smell, a wet earth and rot and wood smoke smell, and at the time I told myself the wood smoke part was my imagination, because who would have a fire down in there? I know now it wasn't my imagination. He was down there. His camp was down there, that whole time, maybe 200 yards below the trail, and we were standing at the top of his drainage with a dog who could smell him and feel him and knew exactly what he was, and we thought it was a dead deer. Marcus made the call to reroute. He had a map, and there was a way to get up onto the ridge that added maybe 3 miles, but avoided that crossing entirely, looping out and around the head of the drainage on higher ground. He wasn't happy about it, the extra distance with me slowing us down, but he said it wasn't worth traumatizing the dog, and honestly I think he was a little shaken by it too. We backtracked and took the longer way. The second we were moving away from that drainage, Boone was fine, tail up, ranging ahead, totally himself, like it had never happened. We talked about it that evening at camp. Marcus's theory was that there'd been something dead down in that drainage, a deer carcass maybe, something we couldn't smell but the dog could, and that the smell of it had set him off. He said dogs can be funny about death smell, that it's not the same as them being interested in it, that some dogs get genuinely upset. He'd convinced himself by the time we went to bed. I let him convince me too. Mostly. It's a reasonable theory. It's probably what I'd have told someone else if they'd told me this story. But I keep coming back to the fact that this is a dog who watched a bear walk past him and didn't stop chewing his stick. The third day was when I first felt it myself. We'd gotten up onto the ridge proper and the hiking was beautiful, long open stretches with views down into the valleys on both sides, the mountains going blue and gray into the distance, layer after layer. The kind of thing that makes you understand why people do this. We made good time. We were both in good moods. And somewhere in the middle of the afternoon, on a flat stretch where the trail ran straight through a stand of older trees, I got the feeling that we were not alone. I can't explain it better than that. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a sight. It was the animal thing, the back of the neck thing, the certainty that comes from some old part of your brain that you are being watched. I stopped walking. Marcus, ahead of me, kept going for a few steps and then noticed, and stopped too. I stood there and looked into the trees on the uphill side of the trail, where the feeling seemed to be coming from, and I saw nothing, and the feeling did not go away. Boone was looking the same direction I was, stiff, focused, not making a sound this time, but locked onto something in the trees, his nose working. "What?" Marcus said. "I don't know," I said. "Felt like something's up there." We waited. Boone held his point for a long moment and then relaxed, shook himself, and went back to sniffing the trail, and the feeling drained out of me too, and I felt a little foolish. Marcus made a joke about me being a city boy now, jumping at squirrels. I laughed. We kept walking, but I noticed, and I think Marcus noticed too, even though he didn't say anything, that for the rest of that afternoon, Boone kept checking behind us, stopping, turning, looking back down the trail the way we'd come, over and over. And every time he did it, I'd turn and look too, and there'd be nothing there but the empty trail going back into the trees. There was one moment that afternoon I left out when I first started writing this, because I talked myself out of it being anything, and I've since decided it was something. We'd stopped for water at a little spring that ran across the trail, and while Marcus was filling the bags, I walked a little ways ahead to a spot where the trees opened, and you could see back along the ridge the way we'd come. A long view, maybe half a mile of trail visible winding along the high ground behind us. And I looked back along it, just idly, and I saw a person. It was far away, right at the limit of what I could make out. A figure standing on the trail where it came out of a stand of trees, standing still, not walking toward us, not walking away, just standing there in the middle of the trail, facing our direction. I watched it for a few seconds, and it didn't move, and I called back to Marcus. "Hey, there's somebody back there." And he came up beside me and looked, and by then the figure was gone. Stepped off the trail, or back into the trees, in the few seconds it took Marcus to walk over. Marcus said it was probably another hiker, and I said there's nobody else out here. We haven't seen anyone since the family. And Marcus said somebody could have started the loop a day behind us, and that was reasonable. That's a reasonable thing. People do start a day behind. But it sat wrong with me. A hiker who sees another hiker waves, or calls out, or at least keeps walking. This one had stood still and watched us, and then disappeared the moment a second person came to look. I didn't have a word for what that meant. I just knew it was wrong. The way the calls in the night would be wrong. The way all of it was wrong, a little more each day. That night we camped on a saddle between two high points, a little exposed but with a nice view, and Marcus seemed quieter than usual. I asked him if everything was okay and he said it was, just tired. But later, after we'd gotten in the tents, I heard him get up. I heard him moving around outside, slow, careful. I unzipped my tent and looked out, and he was standing at the edge of camp in his underwear with his headlamp off, just standing there in the dark, looking down the trail. Boone was sitting next to him doing the same thing, neither of them moving. I asked him what he was doing and he startled, and then he said he thought he'd heard something, an animal probably, and he came back and got in his tent. Boone slept in the vestibule of Marcus's tent that night instead of inside. I heard him shift and resettle a few times, but he was quiet. I didn't tell Marcus about the figure on the trail being on my mind. He didn't tell me what he'd really heard out there in the dark. We were both doing the same thing, I think, which was trying not to be the one who said it out loud because saying it out loud would make it real. And as long as neither of us said it, we could both keep pretending it was animals and tired nerves and a dog with a quirk. We had 2 more nights of pretending left in us. We used them up one at a time. I want to talk about the gear, because the gear is part of how I know I wasn't imagining the whole thing. On the 4th morning, Marcus came out of his tent and his boots were not where he'd left them. He always set his boots just outside the tent door, side by side, with his socks tucked into them. That morning, one boot was a few feet away, turned over, and the socks were gone. We looked for the socks for 20 minutes and never found them. Marcus said maybe an animal took them, attracted to the salt, the sweat, and that's a real thing. Animals do that, but it bothered both of us because if an animal had been in camp, right outside the tent, Boone would have lost his mind. Boone hadn't made a sound all night, and the food bag hung up in its tree hadn't been touched. Whatever had moved the boot and taken the socks had been quiet enough that the dog didn't wake, or hadn't smelled like an animal to him, and had ignored the actual food. There was something else about the boot that I didn't say to Marcus, and have never said to anyone. When I picked it up to hand it back to him, the turned over one, it had been set down in the dirt in a particular way. The dirt around our camp was soft and a little damp, and it took prints. You could see Boone's paw prints all over it, and our own boot prints from the night before. And around where the boot had been moved to, there was a patch of ground that had been brushed, smoothed, like someone had swept it with a branch, or with their hand to wipe out whatever marks were there. I stood looking at it for a few seconds, and then I told myself I was seeing things, and I scuffed it with my own foot and helped Marcus get packed up. I didn't want it to be true. If it was true, it meant someone had crouched down right there, a few feet from where my brother was sleeping, close enough to touch the tent, and had taken the time on the way out to erase their own tracks. I couldn't hold that thought and keep functioning, so I put it down. I've picked it up many times since. Marcus hiked the 4th day in his camp sandals with his spare socks until his feet were too sore, and then put the one pair of socks he had left back in his boots. He was angry about it in a way that I could tell was covering something else. Fear, I think. He didn't want to say it out loud, and neither did I. But I think by the 4th day we had both stopped believing the deer carcass theory and the salt-craving animal theory, and we hadn't found anything to replace them with except a feeling that kept getting worse. The feeling of being watched came back twice that day. Both times Boone caught it before I did. He'd stop, point uphill or back down the trail and go rigid, and then the feeling would land on me a second later like he'd handed it to me. And both times, after a minute, it would pass, and he'd relax, and we'd keep going. We started, without really discussing it, to hike faster, to take shorter breaks. Marcus stopped pointing out the views. We had been on the trail 4 days by then, and we had not seen another human being since the family on the first morning, and we both knew it. And we both knew that the figure I'd seen on the ridge, and the moved boots and the missing socks and the calls in the night did not fit with being alone. And the gap between those two facts was where the fear lived. Somewhere that afternoon, Marcus said the only honest thing either of us said about it the whole trip, before the attack. We were walking and he was in front and he said, not turning around, just said it to the trail ahead of him. "If Boone won't go somewhere tonight, we're not arguing about it." And I said okay, that was all. But it meant he believed the dog now. It meant he'd stopped pretending too. That afternoon we came down off the high ridge and the trail dropped back toward the drainages on the far side of the loop, heading down toward the creek we'd follow back out. And as we lost elevation and the trees closed back in around us, and it got darker and closer and greener, the feeling got stronger and stayed longer. It stopped passing after a minute. It just sat with us. By the time we made camp on the 4th night, down near the creek again, I felt like I had felt the whole afternoon, that we were being paralleled, that something was moving when we moved, and stopping when we stopped, off in the trees, keeping pace, just out of sight. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in my tent and listened. And a few times, I'm almost certain, I heard something out in the dark that was not the creek and was not the wind. A sound like something large moving through brush, slow, careful, off to the side of camp. It would go quiet for a long time. 10 minutes, 15, long enough that I'd start to believe I'd imagined it, and then it would come again, a little closer, or from a different side. Whatever it was patient. It was in no hurry. It moved a few feet, and then it waited, and then it moved a few feet more, and the waiting was the worst part, because a deer doesn't wait like that. A bear doesn't wait like that. A bear blunders through and snuffles, and you know exactly what it is. This stopped and listened between every move. This was thinking about us. And once, late, a sound that I have tried very hard to find an innocent explanation for, and have never been able to. It was a sound like an animal, like an owl maybe, or some bird, a kind of soft hooting call. But it came from 2 different places. First from up the slope on one side of camp, and then, a minute later, the exact same call, the exact same sound, from down the slope on the other side. Like something had moved all the way around us in the dark, fast and silent, and called again from the new spot, or like there were 2 of them, signaling. I lay there and I did the thing you do as a child, where if you stay perfectly still and keep your eyes shut, the thing can't get you. And I am a grown man, and I did that. I lay rigid in my sleeping bag with my fists clenched and my eyes shut, and I prayed for morning. At some point I heard Marcus, in his tent a few feet away, whisper my name, just my name, low, a question. And I whispered back, "Yeah, I hear it." And neither of us said anything else. There was nothing to say. We just lay in our separate tents in the dark, both awake, both listening, a few feet apart and completely alone, and waited it out. Boone, in the vestibule of Marcus's tent, growled low and long when the second call came. It was the first sound I'd heard him make since the drainage. Then he was quiet. I lay there with my heart going and waited for morning. When the sky finally started to gray, I felt something close to grief, because morning meant we'd lived through the night, and some part of me had genuinely not been sure we would. The 5th day is the day my brother almost died, and the day I found out what we'd been dealing with. And I need to be careful telling it because I've gone over it so many times in my head that I'm not always sure anymore, which parts I saw and which parts I figured out later. We packed up fast that morning. Both of us wanted out of that drainage and back up toward open ground. Marcus's plan for the 5th day had us following the creek downstream for a few miles and then climbing up to a final ridge that would bring us back around toward the trailhead. And he wanted to make it to the climb by midday and get up out of the trees. Neither of us said why. We didn't have to. We ate breakfast standing up with our packs half on, both of us watching the trees the whole time. and we were moving before the sun had cleared the ridge above us. About an hour in, Marcus realized he'd left his water filter back at the campsite. It was a stupid thing, the kind of mistake he never made, and I think now that the lack of sleep and the fear had gotten to him more than he let on. The filter was hanging on a branch where he'd left it to drip dry overnight, and he'd walked off without it. And we were going to need it. You can't drink the creek water raw for 3 more days. He swore. He stood there in the trail with his hands on his hips and his head down and just breathed for a second. And I could see him doing the math, the same math I was doing, which was that going back meant going back toward the campsite, back up the trail, back toward where the night sounds had been. He said he'd run back for it. It was maybe a half mile, 15 minutes each way, and I should wait with the packs and with Boone. I didn't want him to go alone. I can't tell you exactly why, except that everything in me was screaming not to split up. But I also didn't have a good reason I could say out loud. Just the feeling, and Marcus was already moving, already dropping his pack against a tree and jogging back up the trail with his empty hands. Boone went to follow him, and I grabbed Boone's collar and held him because someone had to stay with the packs, and I figured the dog should be with me. That 2 of us staying together was safer than splitting the dog off with Marcus and leaving me alone. That was the worst decision I have ever made, and I will think about it for the rest of my life. I should have let the dog go with him. The dog would have warned him. The dog would have known, the way he always knew, a full minute before it happened, and Marcus would have had that minute. And instead, I held the dog by the collar and watched my brother jog around a bend in the trail and out of sight, unprotected, into the worst thing either of us has ever lived through. I sat down on Marcus's pack and held Boone's collar and waited. Boone did not want to wait. He strained against my hand, whining, staring up the trail where Marcus had gone, and after a few minutes, he started up with that low, moaning distress sound again, the same one from the drainage on the second day, and the hair stood up all down his back, and I knew the way you know something in a dream, that something was wrong. Then Boone twisted out of his collar. He's strong, and I wasn't ready for it, and he just spun and pulled his head free and was gone up the trail in a black streak before I could grab him. I yelled after him. I scrambled up and went after both of them, leaving the packs in the trail, which tells you how scared I was, because you don't leave your packs. I heard Boone start barking before I'd gone 50 yards. Not his normal bark. A frantic, snarling, full-throated barking that I had never heard from him. The sound of a dog that means to kill or die. And under it, ahead, I heard my brother scream. I ran. I don't remember the running. The trail bent and I came around it and I saw them. There was a man. I'll describe him as best I can. He was not large. That surprised me later, when I had time to be surprised. He was wiry, smaller than Marcus, dressed in filthy clothes that were some mix of camouflage and ordinary clothing gone gray and brown with dirt. And he had a beard and long matted hair, and skin that was dark with grime and sun. He had something in his hand. I thought at first it was a knife, and it turned out to be a sharpened piece of metal. A flat bar of steel ground to a point and an edge, with cloth wrapped around one end for a grip. A homemade thing. I found out later it had started life as a piece of angle iron, the kind of bracket you'd find on old farm equipment or a piece of fence, and he'd worked it against stone for God knows how long until it held an edge. He'd made a weapon out of garbage with his hands and a rock and a great deal of time, and that, more than anything, is what tells me what he was. People don't do that. People who are out there by accident, lost or hurt, they want to be found. They don't spend weeks grinding a fence bracket into a knife. Marcus was on the ground. There was blood on his arm and on the side of his torso, and he was trying to get up and trying to keep the man's arm away from him at the same time, and the man was on him, fast and silent, working that piece of metal at him. And if Boone had not hit the man at that exact moment, I have no doubt the man would have killed my brother in the next few seconds. Marcus told me afterward, when he could talk about it, that he never heard the man come. He'd grabbed the filter off the branch and turned around, and the man was just there, already swinging, already on him, no warning, no sound, like he'd come up out of the ground. Marcus got an arm up, and that's the arm that got cut, and then he was down and fighting for his life. And that's when I came around the bend. Boone hit the man from the side at a full run, all 60-some pounds of him, and knocked him off Marcus and clamped onto the man's arm, the one holding the weapon. and bit down and would not let go. The man made a high sound and beat at the dog with his free hand, and Boone hung on and shook and tore. I came in screaming with the only thing I had, which was a trekking pole I'd been carrying and somehow still had in my hand, and I swung it at the man's head as hard as I could, and it folded uselessly against him. Those things are made of aluminum. It just crumpled, but it got his attention, and he turned toward me, and I saw his eyes, and there was nothing in them. I don't know how else to put it. There was no person looking out. He looked at me the way you'd look at a problem. Not with rage, not with fear, not the way a person looks at another person in a fight. He looked at me like I was a task he had to complete and was already calculating how. I swung again and got him across the face with the bent pole, and he stumbled and Boone tore loose a chunk of his forearm. I heard it, and the man dropped the metal bar and made that high sound again, and Marcus, behind him, somehow had gotten to his feet and grabbed the man around the neck from behind. And for a few seconds the three of us, four with the dog, were all tangled together in the middle of the trail in a way I can't fully reconstruct. I remember the smell of him, which was the worst part. A smell like rot and animal and something sweet and chemical underneath, and the heat coming off him, and how thin he was, how hard, like there was nothing on him but rope and bone. I remember Marcus yelling at me to get the metal bar, and I got down and grabbed it off the ground. It was warm and the grip was greasy with use, and I held it and didn't know what to do with it. I just knew I didn't want him to have it back. I remember Boone's snarling never stopped the entire time, this continuous tearing sound, and the man hitting at him, and Marcus's arm slick and red where it was locked across the man's throat. And then the man broke free and ran. He got an elbow into Marcus and twisted and dropped low, out of the hold, faster than I could follow, and kicked back at Boone and connected, and the dog yelped, the only sound of pain I heard Boone make the whole trip. And then the man was up and gone. He didn't run up the trail or down it. He went straight into the bushes on the downhill side, into the thick of it, head first, low, and was gone. Just gone. Swallowed up, the way Boone had stared into that drainage on the second day. He didn't crash through it like you or I would. He went into it like he knew exactly where the openings were, like it was a door he'd used 1,000 times, and the green closed behind him. We heard him moving away downslope for a few seconds, fast and getting fainter, and then nothing. Boone made to go after him, into the brush, and Marcus, bleeding, lunged and got a hand on his collar, and held him, and would not let him go. And the three of us stood there in the trail breathing like animals, and I had a sharpened fence bracket in my fist and my brother's blood on my hands, and I think I was making some kind of sound I wasn't aware of, because Marcus put his bloody hand on my shoulder and said my name a couple of times until I stopped. Marcus was hurt, but not as badly as it had looked. The man had cut him across the forearm, deep, a long, clean opening that I could see was going to need a lot of stitches, and stabbed him in the side. But the side wound had mostly caught the muscle along his ribs and not gone into anything vital. We think, because Marcus had been twisting away, and because the homemade weapon was clumsy and thick and tore more than it punched. There was a lot of blood. The forearm especially just kept coming. I got Marcus's shirt off him, which took both of us because his hands were shaking too hard, and I folded it into a pad and pressed it against the forearm, and had him hold it, and then I ran the half-mile up the trail, and got both packs, sprinting, my own pack on my back, and his dragging in one hand, not caring about anything anymore, except getting back to him. And when I got back he was sitting against a tree exactly where I'd left him with the dog pressed against him, and I was so relieved he was still there, still upright, still talking, that I almost couldn't function. I had taken a wilderness first aid course years ago for work, one of those weekend things, and most of it was gone, but enough came back. I cleaned the wounds as best I could with water and the little bottle of stuff from Marcus's kit. I closed the forearm with the butterfly strips from the kit, and then wrapped it tight with a roll of athletic tape, around and around, because the strips alone weren't holding it. The side I packed with gauze and taped down. Marcus was gray and sweating and shaking and saying he was fine. He was fine, in a way that meant he was in shock, and I made him drink water and eat some sugar and kept him talking. Boone would not stop pressing against him, licking at the blood on his arm, whining, this constant low whine. The dog had a cut on his own muzzle where the man had hit him with something, and a place on his side where he'd been kicked that made him flinch when I touched it, and he didn't care about either one. All his attention was on Marcus, on guarding Marcus, his body turned outward toward the brush the whole time I worked, watching the place where the man had gone. We did not go back for the water filter, we left it. We got Marcus up and moving, and we went, as fast as Marcus could go, which was not very fast, down the trail toward the climb that would get us up out of the drainage and toward the trailhead. I carried both packs at first, mine on my back and his on my front, clipped together in a way that probably looked ridiculous and didn't matter, until the climb started, and I couldn't manage both up the steep ground, and we had to stop and consolidate, dumping everything we could afford to leave, the tents, the stove, Marcus's sleeping bag, leaving it all in a pile in the trail, keeping only water and the first aid supplies and the food, and the one sleeping bag in case we had to stop for the night. I think about that pile sometimes too. All our gear sitting there in the middle of the trail, and whether he came back for it after we'd gone, whether he watched us pile it up and leave it, and then came and took it down to his camp. They never said, but the tents were never found, and the rangers found other tents at his camp, so we climbed. Marcus put his head down and climbed, and I stayed right behind him with a hand on his pack ready to catch him, and Boone went ahead and behind and ahead again, ranging, watching, doing the work of 3 dogs. Marcus was bleeding through the tape on his arm, and I stopped him twice to add more, and he was getting weaker, and the climb out of that drainage is something I still have dreams about, the two of us moving up through the green dark a few feet at a time, and the feeling of the man somewhere below and behind us, and not knowing if he was following, if he was waiting, if he'd circle ahead. Boone never gave the signal again, that whole climb, and I came to understand that the lack of the signal was the only thing keeping me upright, because I trusted the dog completely by then. And as long as Boone wasn't pointing back down the slope with his hackles up, I let myself believe the man had stayed below. And he had. As we gained elevation, the feeling fell away, the same way it had every single day, the watched feeling thinning out and lifting off as the trees opened and the air moved and the country got high and clean. By the time we topped out on the ridge, it was gone entirely, and I knew, the way I'd come to know things on that trip, that he hadn't come up with us. The high open ground wasn't his. The green dark was his. He'd let us climb up out of his country, and he'd stayed down in it. We camped one more night, on the highest, most open spot we could find. A bald knob with nothing around it for 100 yards in any direction, no cover, nowhere for anything to hide and get close. I did not sleep at all. I sat up against a rock with the man's metal bar across my knees. I'd kept it, I don't fully know why, and the headlamp off, and watched the dark in every direction until the sky went gray. Boone sat up with me most of the night, the two of us awake on the bald in the dark, and a couple of times I put my hand on his back and felt him breathing, and it was the only thing that kept me from coming apart. Marcus had a fever by morning from the wounds, his face hot when I touched it, and he was slower and more confused than the day before, but he could walk, and we walked. We made the trailhead that afternoon, the 6th day, a day later than planned, and missing half our gear, and one of us bleeding. And Marcus's truck was right where we'd left it in the gravel lot, and there were other cars there, and a family unloading mountain bikes, ordinary people in the ordinary sun, and I have never in my life been so glad to see a parking lot full of strangers. I drove him to the hospital in Brevard. He needed a lot of stitches, more than 40 between the 2 wounds, and a course of antibiotics because the forearm had already started to go bad, and a tetanus shot because of what the weapon had been made of, and they kept him overnight on fluids. I sat in the room with him, and a sheriff's deputy came, and then a second one, and I told it all from the beginning, the dog at the drainage, the figure on the ridge, the moved boots, the missing socks, the calls in the night, the man coming out of the green. I could see them recalibrating as I talked. They'd come in expecting a bear story, an ordinary wildlife thing, somebody mauled and embellishing, and by the time I got to the homemade knife, and the way he'd gone into the bushes, they'd stopped taking the easy notes and started taking the careful kind. One of them stepped out to make a call. When he came back, his whole manner had changed. He asked me to go through the location again, exactly, where the drainage was, where the camp had been on the first night, where the attack happened, and he wrote it all down and drew a little map and had me correct it. That's when the rest of it came out, over the following weeks, in pieces, as the search played out. I'm going to tell you what they found, because it's the part that turns this from a story about a feeling into something I can prove, and because it's the reason I can sleep at all now. The man had a camp. They found it about 3 days into the search, down in the drainage below where the trail crossed, the same drainage Boone had refused to go into on the second day. The deputies had taken my description of where Boone balked and put it together with where the attack happened, and the 2 points bracketed a section of that drainage, and they put a team down into it, and there it was. It was dug into the slope under a rock overhang, hidden in the trees, and it was not the camp of someone who'd been out there for a few days. It was the camp of someone who'd been living back there for a long time. Years, they thought. There was a fire pit, used so many times the rock around it had gone black and crumbling, and a shelter built up out of deadfall and tarps gone green with age, and a sleeping setup, and caches. Caches of stolen gear, of food, of clothing, organized, sorted. The work of someone methodical. There was a whetstone, a real one, worn into a deep curve, and scattered around it the metal filings and ruined attempts that told the story of how long he'd spent making blades. There were several finished ones besides the one he'd used on Marcus. He'd been arming himself slowly, for a long time, with garbage and patience. And in the gear, they found things that did not belong to him. A backpack, good quality, the brand new kind that doesn't go with a man living in a hole. Boots that were too big for him, sized for a larger man. A stuffed sack of clothing folded and kept, and in a side pocket of the backpack, a wallet, with a driver's license in it, and the license belonged to a man who had gone missing in that part of the forest 2 seasons before. The hunter. The face on the bleached flyer outside the gas station I'd walked past carrying beef jerky on the night before we started. They found his things in that camp, kept, sorted, stored, the way you'd keep anything useful. I don't know what they concluded about how he died, and I have chosen, very firmly, not to find out the details, because there are some things you cannot unknow, and I have decided that is one of them. But I know that his family finally got an answer, after 2 years of not knowing where he was or what had happened to him. And I know that answer came because a dog wouldn't cross a creek. They never caught the man. I want to be honest about that because I know it's the part that doesn't have the clean ending. They searched for weeks. They found the camp, and they found sign that he'd been there and gone, but they never found him. The theory the Rangers settled on was that he'd been living back in the deep parts of that forest for years, surviving off stolen supplies, and whatever he could take. That he'd learned the country better than anyone, the drainages and the thick places where you can't be tracked, and that he could move through it like an animal and disappear into it the same way. They think he watched hikers, picked them, followed them, and took what he could when he found someone isolated, and that most people never knew he was there at all. That the only reason we knew was the dog. The calls in the night, the 2 identical sounds from 2 different places. I asked one of the Rangers about that. He didn't want to say much, but he said that people who've been out in country like that for a very long time, alone, sometimes learn to make animal sounds, bird calls, to move without being noticed, and that there had been other reports over the years, from that section of forest, of hikers hearing calls that didn't seem right, that seemed to follow them. He said it carefully, like he was telling me something he wasn't supposed to. I haven't been able to stop thinking about whether there was one of him or more than one. I've decided to believe it was one. It's easier. Marcus healed up. The scar on his forearm is long and white, and the one on his ribs is uglier. He doesn't talk about it much. He has not been back to that loop, and he says he never will, and I believe him, and I will certainly never go. We sold most of the gear from that trip. Neither of us could look at it. Boone is 8 now and slowing down a little, gray coming in around his muzzle over the old scar that healed there. He sleeps in Marcus's bed still, rides in the front seat still. When I visit, he leans against my leg the way he always has. People who meet him see a friendly, calm, slightly lazy old dog, and they're not wrong. That's who he is. But I know who else he is. I know what he did on that trail. I know that he saw something on the second day that the two of us could not see, and that he tried to tell us, the only way he could, that we should turn around and go home, and that we didn't listen, and that when it came down to it, when that man came out of the green to kill my brother, it was the dog who went in without a second of hesitation and put his own body between us and the thing he'd been afraid of the whole time. There was something down in that drainage. The dog knew it before we did. I think about that more than anything else. Not the man, not the camp, not the search. I think about the fact that on the second day, in the bright middle of the afternoon, my brother's dog stood at the edge of a shady little valley and looked down into it and was more afraid than I had ever seen any living thing, and that he was right to be, and that we almost died because we trusted our own eyes over his. If you take a dog into the backcountry and that dog won't go somewhere, don't make him. Don't carry him across. Don't coax him through. Turn around. Go the other way. Go home. They know things we don't. I didn't think anything was wrong at first. That's the part I still go back to, because there were so many small chances where I could have taken it seriously sooner, and every time I found a way to explain it away. We were in Olympic National Park in July, hiking the Hoh River Trail, and if you've never been there, it's the kind of place where everything is already a little confusing, even when nothing bad is happening. The trees are huge. The moss hangs down in long sheets. The trail is easy in some places and muddy in others, and the river is close enough that you can hear it most of the time, but not always see it. It's beautiful, but it also makes distance feel strange. Sound doesn't travel the way you expect. A person can be 20 yards from you and feel hidden. A person can be 100 yards away and sound like they're right behind the next cedar. There were 4 of us on the trip. Me, my older brother Aaron, my friend Matt, and Matt's girlfriend Nicole. We were all in our early 30s except Nicole, who was 29, and none of us were brand new to backpacking. Aaron had done a lot of hunting and fishing growing up. Matt and I had both done plenty of weekend hikes around Oregon and Washington. Nicole was newer than the rest of us, but she was in better shape than all 3 of us, so nobody was worried about her keeping up. The plan was simple. We were going to spend about a week on the Hoh River Trail, go as far as conditions and our legs allowed, maybe push toward Glacier Meadows if everyone felt good, then turn around and come back out the same way. It was not supposed to be some extreme survival trip. We had permits, bear canisters, rain gear, water filters, a Garmin messenger, paper maps, and enough food that our packs felt stupidly heavy at the trailhead. I was the one who kept the little campsite markers. That sounds more official than it was. They were just short strips of orange reflective cord with tiny black clips on them, the kind you use on tent lines so you don't trip at night. I had maybe 8 of them. I didn't tie them to trees or leave anything behind. I clipped them to branches right near camp when we had to walk to a water source or food hang area, or when a social path split off in more than one direction. It was mostly for Nicole, because she hated getting turned around after dark, and honestly for me too, because the Hoh is thick enough that 10 steps into the wrong patch of undergrowth can make a camp disappear. At every site I would clip 1 or 2 markers on dead branches or low limbs, then collect them before we left in the morning. I had done it on other trips and never had an issue. The first day was normal. We parked at the Hoh Rainforest Visitor Center area a little after 9 in the morning, took the usual pictures with packs on, used the bathroom even though none of us really needed to, and started down the trail under that heavy green canopy. The first miles were easy enough that we were all in a good mood. There were families near the beginning, people in clean shoes taking photos of moss, little kids asking if every tree was the biggest tree in the park. After a while, the day hikers thinned out, and it was mostly backpackers, some coming out looking soaked and tired, some heading in like us with too much food and too much confidence. We camped the first night near Mount Tom Creek. I don't remember the exact site number or anything like that, only the feel of it. The ground was damp, the trees were close together, and the air had that cold, wet smell, even though it was summer. We found a legal spot, set up our 2 tents, filtered water, ate freeze-dried meals, and hung around until the light started fading. I clipped one orange marker near the little path to where we were filtering, and one closer to the place where we had set the bear canisters away from the tents. I remember Aaron making a joke that I was turning the woods into a construction zone, and I told him I'd rather look dumb than spend 20 minutes walking circles in the dark looking for my toothbrush. Nothing happened that first night, at least nothing I noticed. I slept badly, but I always sleep badly the first night in a tent. Rain tapped off and on. Something small moved around near camp, probably a mouse. I heard the river and the creek, and Matt snoring through the nylon wall. In the morning, the 2 markers were where I had put them. I clipped them back to the outside of my pack. We made coffee, ate oatmeal, packed up, and kept going. The second day is when the first thing happened, but even now I can understand why I didn't react. We had stopped for lunch near a place where the trail opened up enough that we could sit without blocking anyone. There was a big downed log, wet on one side and dry on the other, and the 4 of us sat in a row with our packs against it. I clipped one of the orange cords to a broken branch beside my pack, not as a trail marker, just because I had taken it off to get into the outside pocket and didn't want to lose it in the salal. We ate tortillas with tuna packets, complained about how heavy the bear canisters were, and watched 2 women pass us heading out. One of them had mud up to her knees and told us the trail ahead was sloppy but fine. Maybe 15 minutes later we packed up, and I reached for the marker. It wasn't there. I checked the ground first. Then I checked the branch again, because sometimes you look right at something and don't see it. Matt asked what I was doing, and I said I dropped one of my little orange things. We all looked around for maybe 30 seconds. Nicole found it about 15 feet away, clipped to a different branch on the other side of the trail. That should have bothered me more, but it didn't. I assumed I had clipped it there and misremembered. Aaron said maybe one of the women had moved it as a joke. Matt said maybe a raven got curious, which made no sense, but we laughed anyway because we were still in that phase of the trip where every inconvenience felt like part of the fun. That afternoon, we met the man for the first time. He was coming toward us from up trail, walking alone, carrying a pack that looked too small for being more than a few miles in. He was probably in his 50s, maybe older, with a gray beard trimmed short and a sun hat that had lost its shape. He wore a brown rain jacket even though it wasn't raining right then, and he had one trekking pole, just one, which clicked against roots as he walked. There was nothing obviously wrong about him. He looked like 100 other older hikers you see in national parks. The only thing I noticed was that he didn't step aside like most people do when a group with big packs comes through. He just stopped in the middle of the trail and waited for us to adjust around him. When we got close, he asked where we were headed, not in an aggressive way, more like small talk. Matt said we were heading deeper in for a few days, maybe toward Lewis Meadow if we felt good. Aaron gave him a look because we usually didn't give detailed plans to strangers, but it was already out. The man nodded like he approved, then asked if we had permits. That made me think he might be a volunteer or some kind of retired ranger type, but he wasn't wearing anything official. I said yes, and he asked if we had bear cans. I said yes again. He looked at Nicole's pack, then at mine, then at the orange cords clipped to my side pocket. "You mark your camps?" he asked. I said only enough to keep from tripping over ourselves in the dark. He nodded again, but not like he thought it was funny. He said, "People leave things out here all the time." Then he stepped aside and let us pass. That was the whole conversation. It lasted maybe 30 seconds. Nobody said anything about it afterward except Aaron, who muttered that the guy had hall monitor energy. We kept hiking. Our second campsite was farther in, not all the way to Lewis Meadow, but past the easy beginner part of the trail. It had been a wet day, and by the time we stopped, everyone was quiet in that way people get when they've done enough walking. We set up, filtered, ate, and went through the normal routine. I clipped one orange marker near the path back from water because the little trail braided around a fallen tree, and one near a nurse log close to where we had walked off to put the bear cans. I remember being careful with them because I had already lost track of one earlier. I even counted them before bed. 8 total. 2 clipped out. 6 in my pack. Sometime after midnight, I woke up needing to pee. The rain had stopped, and the woods had that dead quiet that somehow still isn't quiet at all. You could hear drops falling from leaves, little ticks and pats all around, and the river farther off. I unzipped the tent slowly because I didn't want to wake Matt, who was sharing with me. Aaron and Nicole were in the other tent 10 feet away. I put on my headlamp but used the red light, stepped out, and walked a little way from camp. The orange marker by the water path was not where I had left it. I didn't panic. I didn't even feel scared right away. It was just wrong. It had been clipped to a branch at about chest height, on the left side of the path. Now I could see a dull orange shine about 6 or 7 feet farther down, lower to the ground, clipped to a different branch. My first thought was that an animal had brushed it, or the branch had bent. Then I stepped closer and saw the original branch. It was fine. The marker had been unclipped and reclipped. There was no other way for it to move like that. I stood there in my socks and camp shoes listening. I had the feeling you get when you walk into a room and know someone was just there, even though there's no proof. I swept my red light across the brush and saw nothing but wet leaves and tree trunks. I wanted to wake everyone up, but I also felt embarrassed. That sounds dumb, but it's true. I didn't want to be the guy dragging everybody out of their tents at midnight because a 4-inch piece of cord was on the wrong branch. So I moved it back, peed, and got in the tent. In the morning I told them. I tried to keep it casual, but Aaron knew me well enough to see it bothered me. Matt said maybe someone walked through camp at night and moved it, which was supposed to make me feel better, but didn't. Nicole asked why anyone would do that. Nobody had an answer. We checked our food, our packs, our wallets, and the small stuff we'd left in vestibules. Nothing was missing. The bear cans were still where we put them. The second marker near the food area was still in place. Aaron crouched near the water path and looked at the mud. He was better at that kind of thing than me. There were prints everywhere because all 4 of us had walked there, and other people had probably used the same path before us. He pointed out one partial boot print that looked bigger than ours, but the tread was smeared and already softening in the damp ground. It could have been old. It could have been from anyone. We decided it was weird but not worth changing the trip over. That decision sits badly with me now, but at the time it felt reasonable. Nothing had been stolen. Nobody had threatened us. We were on a popular trail in a national park in July. Weird people hike too. Weird people pass through camps by mistake. Weird people do harmless weird things. That was what I told myself as we packed. Day 3 was the day the trip changed shape, but it did it slowly. We hiked through that deep green corridor all morning. Sometimes the Hoh River would show itself through the trees, wide and pale and fast, with gravel bars and braided channels. Sometimes the trail pulled away, and we were back in the forest, stepping over roots and ducking under wet branches. The weather kept changing its mind. Light rain, then sun filtering through, then rain again. Our clothes never fully dried. My shoulders started aching from the pack straps. Matt's right knee was bothering him, and Nicole kept waiting for him without making a big deal of it, which somehow made him more irritated. Normal trip stuff. Around lunch we passed the man again. He was not on the trail at first. That's what made it strange. We came around a bend where the forest opened slightly, and I saw him standing off to the right, maybe 20 yards away, partly behind a tree. He was looking at the ground like he had dropped something. Same brown rain jacket. Same shapeless hat. Same single trekking pole in his hand. He looked up when we came through, and for just a second his face did not change. Then he smiled like he had just recognized us. Aaron stopped before the rest of us did. He asked if everything was okay. The man said he was checking a spot he remembered from years ago. His voice was calm. Too calm, maybe. But that might be me adding things after the fact. He asked how far we'd made it the night before. Nobody answered right away. Then Matt, trying to be friendly or maybe just filling the silence, said we had camped a few miles back. The man nodded and looked at my pack again. "You still using those orange markers?" he asked. I said yes, but we packed everything out. He said, "Good. People get confused out here." Aaron said we needed to keep moving, and we did. I looked back once. The man had not moved. He was still standing off trail, watching us leave. I told myself he was just socially awkward. I told myself he probably worked trail crews in the past, or volunteered, and had that lonely older man habit of making every conversation last too long. But I also moved the orange markers from the outside of my pack to the lid pocket, where they couldn't be seen. We reached Lewis Meadow later that afternoon, tired and damp and hungry. There were other people around, which helped. A couple from Portland had a tent already set up. A father and teenage son were cooking near another site. We saw boot prints, heard voices, smelled somebody's dinner before we saw them. It made the whole thing with the man feel smaller. Predators don't hang around crowded backcountry camps, I thought. Crazy people don't keep following you when there are witnesses. Again, that was me trying to file the problem somewhere comfortable. We set up a little distance from the others. I didn't clip any orange markers near the main camp. I told everyone I wasn't going to use them that night because there were other people around, and the paths were obvious. What I actually did was clip one marker low on a branch behind our tent, where nobody would see it unless they walked behind us, and another near a stump on the little route to where we set the bear cans. I didn't tell the others at first. I wanted to know if something was happening without making the whole group tense. That was stupid. I know that now. If you are testing whether somebody is messing with your camp in the backcountry, you should tell the people you are with. But at the time, I had this idea that if I made too big of a deal out of it and nothing happened, I would become the problem. So I kept it to myself. After dinner, the rain finally broke and the evening turned almost nice. Mist hung in the trees. The meadow had that wet, open smell. People were talking quietly around their stoves. Someone laughed in another camp, and it made me feel normal for the first time all day. We played a few rounds of cards on top of a bear can. Matt took ibuprofen for his knee. Nicole brushed her teeth and said she was going to sleep hard enough that a bear could drag the tent away and she wouldn't notice. Aaron walked the edge of camp for a while, not saying much. Before bed, I checked the hidden marker behind the tent. It was still there. I checked the one near the bear cans, still there. I went to sleep feeling foolish and relieved. At some point in the night, Aaron woke me up by pressing on the outside of my tent and saying my name in a low voice. I came awake fast because he wasn't the kind of person who messed around. Matt stirred beside me. I unzipped the tent and saw Aaron crouched there with his headlamp off. He put one finger up, not to be dramatic, just telling me to listen. There was a sound behind camp. It was not loud. That was the worst part. If it had been crashing or running, we could have called it an elk or a bear and dealt with it. This was careful. A light scrape, a pause, another scrape, something brushing fabric or nylon, then a small hard sound like plastic tapping wood. Matt whispered, "What is that?" Aaron didn't answer. He moved toward the sound and I followed, because I didn't want him going alone. I had my headlamp in my hand but didn't turn it on. The campsite was dark, except for faint light from the sky and the pale shapes of tents. We went past Aaron and Nicole's tent, past the cooking area, and toward the place where we had put the bear cans. I remember how wet my hands felt. Not sweaty exactly, just cold and damp from the air and from fear. When Aaron turned his light on, the beam landed on our bear cans. They were not open, they were not damaged, but one of them had been moved about 5 feet from where we left it. My orange marker was gone from the stump. I swept my own light around and saw it clip to a branch farther out, low and crooked, like someone had placed it in a hurry. Nobody was there. Aaron called out, "Hey!" Not loud enough to wake the whole meadow, but loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. There was no answer. Then from somewhere farther off, past the edge of our light, a branch cracked. It wasn't a huge sound, but it was distinct. Something stepping wrong. Aaron lifted his light, and for half a second I thought I saw a dull patch of brown between the trees. It could have been bark. It could have been a jacket. Then it was gone. We woke Nicole. We checked everything. Nothing was missing from the bear cans, mostly because they were still locked. Our packs were in our vestibules and untouched. The couple from Portland had not heard anything. The father and son were asleep until Aaron went over and asked if they had seen anyone walking around. They hadn't. Nobody wanted to make a huge scene in the middle of the night. That's another thing I think people misunderstand about situations like this. You imagine yourself acting decisive, raising alarms, marching out, taking control. In real life, you are tired, wet, embarrassed, and trying not to sound insane to strangers who are half asleep. We did move the bear cans closer, not close enough to be unsafe, but closer than before. Aaron and I stayed up for maybe an hour, sitting on a wet log with headlamps off, listening. The woods sounded like woods. Water, drops, small animals. Nothing else happened. Eventually we went back to bed, though I don't think any of us slept much. In the morning, we found the first real sign that someone had been there. Behind the bear can area, in soft mud near a patch of sword ferns, there were 2 clear boot prints. They were bigger than mine and Aaron's, with a tread pattern none of us had. A deep heel, then a chevron pattern toward the front. The prints came from the direction of the trees, stopped near the bear cans, then angled away toward a faint path that did not connect to the main trail as far as we knew. The orange marker from the stump had been moved to that branch, but the clip had mud on it. Whoever moved it had handled it with dirty fingers. I know that sounds like a small detail, but seeing the mud on that little black clip made me feel worse than seeing the boot prints. Mud meant a hand, a person. Not a branch snagging it, not an animal nosing at it, not wind, not confusion. Someone had unclipped it, carried it, and clipped it somewhere else. Nicole said we should leave, just straight out, turn around and hike back. Aaron agreed, at least at first. Matt didn't. His knee was sore, but I think his pride was worse. He kept saying we were already deep in, that the guy probably just had mental issues, that he had only moved things and hadn't hurt anyone. He said if we turned around every time some weirdo acted weird in the woods, we'd never go anywhere. Nicole got quiet after that, not because she agreed, but because she didn't want to fight. I wish I could tell you I made the right call. I didn't. I split the difference, which is usually what people do when they want to feel responsible without fully changing course. I said we should continue one more day, but stay around other hikers if we could. Keep the Garmin on my shoulder strap, keep knives and spray accessible, and stop giving information to anyone. If anything else happened, we would turn around immediately. That sounded reasonable enough that everyone accepted it except Nicole, and even she didn't push after Aaron said he would keep watch. So we kept going. Day 4 was the hottest day, and that made everything worse. The rainforest still felt wet, but the air got heavy and close. Our rain shells stayed packed for once, and steam came off the trail in places where sunlight reached mud. Matt's knee slowed him down. Nicole walked ahead with Aaron for long stretches, and I stayed back with Matt, partly to keep him company, and partly because I felt guilty that he was hurting. None of us talked much about the man in the brown jacket. We talked around it. We mentioned the boot prints. We mentioned that guy. We did not say stalker. We did not say dangerous. Not yet. Sometime late morning, we stopped near a river access where the water spread out pale and loud over gravel. We filtered water and soaked our feet. I remember standing barefoot on cold stones, looking across the braids of the river and feeling like the valley was too big and too empty. That sounds dramatic, but it wasn't. It was just a physical feeling, like we were very small and anyone could be anywhere. Aaron scanned the opposite bank for a long time. Nicole asked what he was looking at, and he said nothing. Matt filled his bottle last. He had a blue plastic bottle he used for drink mix, and he left it sitting on a rock while he helped me tighten the filter bag. A group of 3 backpackers passed us going the other direction. 2 men and 1 woman, all cheerful and sunburned. We asked if they had seen a man hiking alone in a brown jacket with 1 trekking pole. One of the men said they had seen a guy like that the day before near a side path, but they didn't think much of it. He was sitting on a log eating something out of a can. They remembered him because he didn't say hello. That should have been enough to send us back. I know that, but by then the problem had become slippery. The man was real, yes, and he had probably been near us, but no one had seen him do anything. We had boot prints, moved markers, a shifted bear can, and a bad feeling. Out there, all of that felt serious and not serious at the same time. After lunch, Matt drank from the blue bottle and made a face. He said it tasted like soap or pool water. We all smelled it. There was a sharp chemical smell, faint, but there. At first I thought it was his electrolyte tablet, but he hadn't added one yet. Then I thought maybe his bottle had not been rinsed well before the trip. Matt dumped it out and rinsed it 3 times in filtered water. He said he felt fine, and we moved on. An hour later, he didn't feel fine. He got nauseous and had to stop twice. His stomach cramped and he looked pale in a way I didn't like. We could not prove anything had been put in the bottle. He could have gotten sick from food, from stress, from bad water, from pushing too hard with a sore knee. But the timing bothered all of us, and Nicole finally said what nobody else wanted to say. Someone had touched the bottle. We stopped early that day near a site that had room but no other people. That was not what we wanted, but Matt was done. He sat on a log with his head between his knees while Aaron and I set up. Nicole filtered water and kept looking behind her. I didn't clip any markers, not one. I counted them in my lid pocket and left them there, 8 total. I remember counting them twice. We made the most organized camp we had ever made. Packs inside vestibules, cook area clean, bear cans locked and set where we could see the general direction from the tents, Garmin charged, headlamps around our necks not buried in bags. Aaron had a fixed blade knife he used for fishing and kept it under his sleeping pad. I had a small folding knife and bear spray. Matt had bear spray too, but he was in no condition to do much. Nicole had trekking poles, and she slept with one beside her like a spear, which might sound funny until you've spent a night thinking someone is outside your tent. Before dark, Aaron walked a slow circle around the camp. He found old prints, elk tracks, normal mud, nothing clear. We ate as early as we could. Matt only had a few bites of rice and then lay down. Nobody wanted to sit around telling stories or playing cards. The whole mood had changed from hiking trip to waiting room. Every little sound got sorted and judged. Water drop, bird, branch settling, pack strap sliding, unknown. The man came into camp just before full dark. I was standing near our tent, putting my rain cover over my pack even though the sky was clear, when I heard Aaron say, "Can I help you?" His voice was level, but there was something in it I had only heard a few times in my life. I turned and saw the man at the edge of camp, standing between 2 trees. Brown jacket, hat, 1 trekking pole. He was close enough that I could see his face, but the light was dim enough that his eyes looked dark under the brim. He said he was just passing through. Aaron told him the trail was behind him. The man looked toward the tents, then at me, then at Nicole. His gaze stopped on Matt's tent for a second because Matt coughed inside. Then he said something about checking whether everyone had proper food storage. That was when I knew for sure he was not just strange. He was trying on explanations. He was picking whatever sounded official enough to get him a few more seconds. I told him we were fine and that he needed to keep moving. My voice shook a little. I hated that, but it did. He looked at my pack and smiled barely. "No orange tonight?" Nobody answered. Aaron took 1 step forward. Not a big threatening step, just enough. The man stepped back at the same time, like he had been expecting it. Then he turned and walked away through the trees, not toward the main trail at first, but at an angle. We stood there listening to his trekking pole click a few times, then stop. After that, nothing. We should have left right then, even in the dark. I know people say never hike at night unless you have to, and that is usually good advice. But I think that night we had to, and we still didn't. Matt was sick. Nicole was scared but trying not to show it. The trail was muddy and rooty, and none of us wanted to stumble around in the dark with a man somewhere nearby. So we did what felt safest in the moment. We stayed together, made ourselves as alert as possible, and waited for morning. Nobody slept properly. We split the night into watches without making a formal schedule. Aaron stayed up first. I stayed up after him. Nicole said she couldn't sleep anyway and sat with me for a while, wrapped in her jacket, holding a trekking pole across her lap. She didn't say much. She asked once if I thought he had done something to Matt's bottle. I said I didn't know. She said she did. That was the end of that conversation. Around 2 in the morning, during my watch, I heard movement to the west of camp. It was not close, maybe 50 yards, maybe more. Slow steps, then quiet, then 1 scrape. I turned my headlamp on high and shined it through the trees. Nothing. I woke Aaron anyway. We sat back to back near the tents until dawn. The movement did not come closer, or if it did, we didn't hear it. In the morning, one of the orange markers was hanging from a branch 10 feet outside camp. I had not put any out. I had counted all 8 in my lid pocket the evening before. When I saw that orange strip shining in the gray morning light, I felt something in my chest drop. I opened my pack with shaking hands and counted 7. He had gotten into my pack, not far. Not enough to take food or money or gear. He had opened the lid pocket, taken one marker, and clipped it outside camp while we were sleeping or while we were sitting awake looking the other way. That was worse than theft. That was him proving he could reach us. He had come close enough to touch my pack, close enough to stand beside our tent, close enough that if he had wanted to cut fabric or take a shoe or put something else in a bottle, he could have. That ended the argument. We were leaving. Matt was still weak, but he could walk. We redistributed some of his gear. Aaron took most of his food. I took part of his tent. Nicole took his cook kit. We ate quickly, packed badly, and started back the way we had come. Nobody cared about reaching Glacier Meadows anymore. Nobody cared about the original plan. We wanted people, a ranger, a road, anything that wasn't that stretch of woods. The problem was that turning around did not make us safe. It just put us on the same trail with the same man somewhere behind us, or ahead of us, or off to the side. Every bend felt like a place he could be waiting. Every muddy patch had prints, and every print looked like his if you stared at it long enough. We moved faster than we should have with Matt's knee and stomach, and by mid-morning he was hurting badly. His face had gone gray again, and he kept apologizing, which made Nicole angry because it wasn't his fault. We passed the spot where we had stopped at the river the day before. Matt stared at the rock where his bottle had been and said nothing. I looked for prints, but the gravel was useless. Aaron wanted to keep going. So did I. But Matt needed water, and a real rest. We found an open place near the river with enough visibility that nobody could walk right up on us from one side. I kept the Garmin clipped high on my shoulder strap, with the SOS cover flipped open but not pressed. I had never felt dramatic carrying it before. That day, I kept touching it with my thumb like a rosary. While we rested, a solo hiker came up from down trail. He was younger, maybe mid-20s, with a big green pack and headphones around his neck. We probably looked awful because he slowed down and asked if we were okay. Aaron did the talking. He described the man, the brown jacket, the single trekking pole, and asked if he had passed anyone like that. The hiker said no, not today. Then he said something that made us all go quiet. He had seen a small camp off trail the previous afternoon, not too far back, with a brown tarp and a bunch of gear spread out under it. He thought it was strange because it didn't look like a normal backpacking setup. Too much stuff. A cooler maybe. A plastic bin. He assumed it was trail crew or someone with permission. Aaron asked exactly where. The hiker tried to explain, but trail directions in the woods are messy. A bend after a creek, a big root ball, a faint side path. Maybe 2 miles from where we were, maybe 3. He said he didn't go close. He just noticed it through the trees and kept walking. That piece changed the man in my mind. Until then, part of me still pictured him as a hiker. A disturbed hiker, but someone moving like us, carrying what he needed, bound by the same limits. A camp with a plastic bin and extra supplies meant something else. It meant he might have been living out there. It meant he wasn't just crossing paths. He had a base. He had time. We thanked the solo hiker and told him to be careful. He looked uncomfortable, like he wanted to help, but also wanted to get away from whatever we had just handed him. I didn't blame him. He continued up trail. We continued down. By early afternoon, Matt was limping badly. His knee had stiffened from the faster pace, and whatever had made him sick had left him drained. Aaron wanted to push to Lewis Meadow or farther if we could, somewhere with other campers. Nicole wanted to stop before Matt collapsed. I was caught between them, but I knew Nicole was right. If Matt went down hard, we would be slower and more vulnerable. We needed him functional. We made camp earlier than any of us liked, but we chose the spot carefully. It was near enough to the trail that other hikers could see us, but not right on it. The river was audible. The ground was damp, but flat. We had visibility in 3 directions, and a thick tangle of downed trees behind us, which seemed good because nobody could come through it quietly. I didn't use the orange markers. I almost threw them into the bear can just so I wouldn't have to look at them, but I kept them in my pocket instead. I don't know why. Maybe because by then they felt like evidence. We had a serious conversation that afternoon, the kind you don't have unless things are bad. Not much dialogue, not a lot of back and forth. Just facts. We were still at least a full day from the trailhead at Matt's pace, maybe longer. We had a satellite messenger. We had not been physically attacked yet, unless the bottle had been tampered with, and we could not prove that. Pressing SOS might bring help, but it also might put rescuers on a muddy backcountry trail for something that sounded vague if you said it too quickly. A suspicious man, moved markers, possible tampering, fear. At the same time, not pressing it meant waiting until things got worse. I sent a non-emergency message to my wife through the Garmin. I told her we were cutting the trip short because of a concerning person on trail, that we were okay for now, and that if she didn't hear from me by the next afternoon, she should call the park. I included our approximate location as best I could. That message took a while to send under the trees. When it finally went through, I felt a little better. Not safe, but less invisible. Around 4, 2 backpackers came through heading out, a man and woman in their 40s. We stopped them and asked about the man. They had seen him, not that day, but the day before, near a creek crossing. He had asked if they were carrying extra fuel. When they said no, he asked if they had seen a group of 4 with 2 green tents. That was us. Our tents were both green. He had asked about us specifically. I remember Nicole sitting down on a log after they said that. She didn't faint or cry. She just sat, like her legs decided they were done. Matt stared at the ground. Aaron asked the couple whether the man seemed aggressive. They said no, just odd. The woman said he had smiled too much. Then they kept going, faster than before. That was the moment I should have pressed SOS. I almost did. My thumb was on the button. But the couple had just gone out. My wife had our location. We were leaving in the morning. I told myself one more night, and then we would be around people, and the whole thing would become a story we told carefully because it sounded exaggerated. That night was the worst night of my life up to that point, and nothing even happened until near dawn. We did not cook. We ate bars and dry food because none of us wanted the smell around camp or the distraction of stoves. Matt took more ibuprofen and wrapped his knee. Aaron walked the perimeter and set up 2 empty metal cups with a cord between them near the most open approach. Not a trap, just something that might make noise. Nicole braided her hair, unbraided it, then braided it again. I kept checking the Garmin, even though there was nothing new to see. The woods got darker by degrees. The river sound filled the spaces between us. We slept in shifts again. Matt was useless for watch, not because he didn't want to help, but because he was sick and exhausted. Nicole took first watch with Aaron. I took second. Aaron took third. That was the plan. I lay down with my shoes on and my headlamp around my neck. I didn't get inside my sleeping bag. I just pulled it over me. During my watch, around 1 or 2, I heard something I still cannot explain with certainty. It was a low sound from the trail, not an animal call, not a voice exactly, more like someone clearing their throat but holding it in. Then silence. I woke Aaron with one touch. We listened. Nothing. I wanted to shine my light, but Aaron put a hand on my arm and shook his head. Later, he told me he didn't want to give away exactly where we were sitting. We waited 10 minutes, maybe 15. No movement, no cup alarm, no footsteps. At first light, I finally fell asleep by accident. I know it was first light because the tent walls had turned gray and birds were starting up. I was sitting with my back against a tree 1 second, and the next second Nicole was screaming. I came up badly, half tangled in my sleeping bag, and grabbed for the bear spray. Aaron was already moving. Matt was yelling from inside the tent. Nicole was not in camp. Her voice came from the direction of the food area and then cut off into a choked sound. Aaron reached her first. I was maybe 5 seconds behind him, maybe less, but it felt like much longer. She was on the ground near the bear cans, fighting with someone above her. At first, all I saw was brown fabric and arms. The man had one hand twisted in the shoulder strap of her jacket and the other near her face. He was not trying to kill her right then. I need to be clear about that. He was trying to control her, to drag her or pin her, and she was fighting so hard that he couldn't get a stable grip. One of her trekking poles was on the ground. The other was still in her hand, and she was jabbing backward with it without aim. Aaron hit him. There is no cleaner way to say it. He drove into him from the side and knocked him off Nicole. The man fell against a log, and Aaron went down with him. I sprayed bear spray, but I was scared of hitting Aaron and Nicole, so I aimed too high and mostly blasted the air and the brush behind them. Some of it drifted back into all of us. Everyone started coughing. The man scrambled up faster than I expected. He had something in his hand, a rock or a short piece of wood. I couldn't tell. He swung it at Aaron and caught him across the side of the head. The sound was not loud. That bothered me later. In movies, hits sound huge. This was a dull, wet crack, and Aaron dropped to one knee like his leg had been cut out from under him. Nicole screamed again. I went at the man with the bear spray can in one hand and my folding knife closed in the other because I had not even managed to open it. I don't remember deciding to do that. I only remember seeing Aaron's blood and moving. The man backed away. His face and beard were wet from the spray, and his eyes were squeezed almost shut. He was coughing but still upright. Matt came limping out of the tent with his own bear spray and hit him with a direct stream from maybe 8 feet away. That one got him full in the face. The man made a sound I can still hear, a raw, angry sound, and stumbled backward into the trees. Aaron tried to stand and fell again. Nicole crawled away from the bear cans, gasping. I thought the man was going to run. He didn't. Not at first. He stayed just inside the brush, bent over, coughing and spitting. We could hear him. We could see pieces of him between leaves. Matt kept yelling at him to leave, over and over, but his voice was breaking. I got the Garmin in my hand and pressed SOS. There was no more debate, no more one more night, no more maybe. I pressed it and held it until the emergency screen confirmed. The man moved deeper into the trees after that. We heard him crashing for several seconds, then nothing. I don't know if the SOS scared him. I don't know if the spray finally overwhelmed him. I don't know if he realized he had crossed a line that would bring people looking. All I know is that he left, and we were suddenly alone with the damage. Aaron's scalp was split open above his ear, and blood was running down his neck into his shirt. Head wounds bleed a lot, and I knew that, but knowing it didn't help much when it was your brother. He was conscious but confused. He kept asking where Nicole was even though she was right in front of him. Nicole had bruises forming on her wrist and neck, and a cut under one eye where his nail or ring had caught her. Matt was coughing from the bear spray and trying not to throw up. I was shaking so badly I had trouble opening the first aid kit. The Garmin response came through after a few minutes. Emergency services had our coordinates. They asked for the nature of the emergency. I typed with stiff fingers. Assaulted by man on trail. 1 head injury. Suspect fled. Need evacuation. Law enforcement. The message took time to send. The waiting between each message was awful. We were under trees, and satellite messages do not move like phone texts. They crawl. Every delay felt like being abandoned. We moved camp without really moving camp. What I mean is, we pulled everyone into the most open area we could find near the trail, away from the bear can spot and away from the thick trees. We left the tent standing. We left some gear scattered. I put pressure on Aaron's head with gauze and a bandana. Nicole held the bear spray after that and did not put it down. Matt sat facing the trees with his spray in both hands. Nobody spoke unless there was a reason. At some point, maybe 20 minutes after the attack, I saw the orange marker. It was clipped to Nicole's pack, not one of the visible straps, not somewhere it could have snagged by accident. It was clipped low on the back, near the bottom compression strap. I saw it because the pack was lying on its side where she had dropped it the night before. I knew immediately what it meant. He had been in camp before the attack. He had touched her pack. Maybe he had clipped it there to mark which pack was hers. Or maybe just to scare us after we found it. Maybe he planned to take it. Maybe it meant nothing, except that his mind was wrong in a way I will never understand. But I had 7 markers in my pocket, and there was the 8th, clipped to Nicole's pack. I didn't tell her right then. I unclipped it and put it in my pocket with the others. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it. We waited for hours. That's something people don't always understand about rescue. Pressing SOS does not teleport anyone to you. The Hoh River Trail is not a sidewalk, and even when people start moving fast, They still have to cover real ground. We got messages telling us help was being coordinated, asking whether the suspect was still nearby, asking if Aaron was conscious, asking if the bleeding was controlled. I answered as clearly as I could. Aaron got more lucid after a while, which helped. He knew his name, knew where we were, knew the year, though he asked twice whether the man was gone. Other hikers found us before rangers did. First a couple heading in, then a solo backpacker, then the 2 women we had seen on the first day, coming back out earlier than expected because one had a blister. We warned all of them. The couple stayed with us. The solo hiker kept going out with a written note from me and our coordinates in case the Garmin failed. The 2 women turned around and stayed nearby too. Having people around changed everything. The woods did not feel safe exactly, but it felt like the man had lost whatever private hold he had over us. A backcountry ranger reached us in the early afternoon with another responder. I don't remember their names. I remember the ranger's face because he was calm in a way that made me want to cry. He assessed Aaron, checked Nicole, asked direct questions, and did not act like we were overreacting. When I described the man, the brown jacket, the single trekking pole, the moved markers, the possible tampering, the off-trail camp, he wrote everything down. When I showed him the muddy orange markers in my pocket and explained what had happened, his expression changed only slightly, but I saw it. He understood the pattern. They decided Aaron could walk with assistance rather than wait for a helicopter, which might take longer and might not be possible under the canopy and conditions. That began the slowest hike of my life. We packed only what we needed. Some gear was left for later retrieval. Aaron walked between me and the responder. Nicole stayed close behind us. Matt limped but moved better once adrenaline took over. The ranger kept stopping to listen, scanning the woods, checking side paths and muddy patches. More law enforcement was coming in from the trailhead side, he told us. We just needed to keep moving. About a mile from the attack site, the ranger stopped. There was a side path I would not have noticed on my own. It wasn't a real trail, more like a narrow break where ferns had been pushed down repeatedly. The ranger looked at the ground, then at the responder, and told us to keep moving with him. He did not go down it, not then. He marked the area in his GPS and kept us moving. Later, I learned that path led toward the man's camp. We reached a busier area by late afternoon. There were more hikers, and then more responders, and finally the long, muddy process of getting us out became less about fear and more about exhaustion. Aaron's head was bandaged. Nicole had gone very quiet. Matt's knee was swollen badly. I had a headache from crying without realizing I had been crying, from bear spray, from dehydration, from everything. At the trailhead, there were vehicles and uniforms and questions. My wife had been contacted after my first SOS messages were confirmed, and by the time we got enough signal for my phone to work, I had more missed calls than I could look at. I called her from the parking area, and when she answered, I couldn't speak for a few seconds. I had sent her a calm message the day before about a concerning person. Now I was standing by an ambulance while my brother got his head checked because the concerning person had attacked us. Aaron ended up needing staples. He had a concussion but no skull fracture, which still feels lucky to the point of being obscene. Nicole had bruising on her neck and wrists, and the cut under her eye healed into a small scar you can barely see now unless you know where to look. Matt spent 2 days dealing with stomach issues and a knee that looked like a grapefruit. I had no real injuries except irritated eyes and lungs from the spray and some bruises I didn't remember getting. They caught the man the next day, not in a dramatic chase. He was found near an illegal camp off a faint path not far from where the solo hiker had described it. From what we were told later, he had a brown tarp, plastic storage bins, stolen backpacking gear, food packaging, fuel canisters, several wallets with no cash in them, and small items that had clearly come from different hikers. He also had one trekking pole. The other had either broken or been discarded before we met him. There were bare can scratches, where he had apparently tried and failed to open other people's containers. There were notebooks too, but I never got to see what was in them. An investigator told us there were route notes and descriptions of groups. Not names, mostly physical details. Green tents, red jacket, blue bottle, orange markers. The chemical smell in Matt's bottle was never fully proven to be anything specific, at least not in a way that became part of the case as far as I know. By the time we reported it, the water was dumped and the bottle had been rinsed. That part still bothers Matt. He wanted proof. I think he wanted to know whether he got sick because of that man or because of bad luck. I understand that. But for me, the proof was in everything else. The man asked about our markers. The markers moved. He asked others about our tents. He touched my pack. He clipped one to Nicole's pack. He attacked her near the bear cans before dawn. I don't need the bottle to make the story make sense. The official version was less neat than the version people want when they hear something like this. He wasn't some famous serial offender. He wasn't wanted for a dozen murders. He was a transient man with prior theft and assault issues, mental health problems, and enough outdoor knowledge to stay hidden for stretches. He had been moving around the edges of public land and trails, stealing gear when he could, approaching hikers when he thought they were vulnerable, and retreating into illegal camps. We were not chosen because of anything special about us. We were chosen because we were visible, predictable, polite, and carrying things he wanted. Or maybe because I had those orange markers and he fixated on them. I don't know. I don't think anyone really does. For a while after, I kept thinking about all the moments where the trip could have gone differently. If Matt hadn't mentioned Lewis Meadow, if I hadn't kept using the markers after the first one moved, if we had left when Nicole first said leave, if we had pressed SOS the night those hikers told us he asked about our green tents. That kind of thinking feels useful, but it isn't always. It can become a way to punish yourself with imaginary versions of events where you are smarter than you were. The truth is that fear in real life is rarely clean. It builds out of small things that each have a normal explanation, until there are too many normal explanations stacked on top of each other. I still hike, but I do it differently. I don't share detailed routes with strangers. I don't leave bottles unattended near people I don't know. I don't worry about sounding rude if somebody asks questions they don't need answered. I keep my satellite messenger where I can reach it, not buried in a pack. I listen to the person in the group who wants to leave, because sometimes that person is the only one not trying to protect the plan. Aaron hikes too, though not as much. Matt says he is done with overnight backpacking, and I believe him. Nicole went out once the next summer with a women's hiking group and sent us all a photo from a sunny ridge, smiling, which made me happier than I expected. None of us talk about the attack in a dramatic way. When it comes up, we stick to facts. Brown jacket, one trekking pole, boot prints near the bear cans, orange marker on the wrong branch, orange marker missing from my pack, orange marker clipped to Nicole's pack. The markers are in a plastic bag in my garage now. I know that sounds strange. I should have thrown them away, and maybe one day I will. They are just dirty orange cords with little black clips, nothing important by themselves. But when I look at them, I remember how danger actually arrived for us. It didn't come screaming out of the woods on the first night. It moved one small thing, then another. It asked normal questions. It stood just off trail and watched us explain it away. It counted on us being reasonable. That is the part I tell people when they ask what happened on the Hoh River Trail. Not because I want them afraid of the woods. I don't. The woods didn't do anything to us. The trail was just a trail. The river was just a river.